You can be seated. Well, good morning, y'all. I want to begin by reading a passage from the book of Revelation, chapter 1, verses 1 through 3. It says, "The revelation from Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show his servants what must soon take place. He made it known by sending his angel to his servant John, who testifies to everything he saw. That is, the word of God and the testimony of Jesus Christ. So blessed is the one who reads aloud the words of this prophecy, and blessed are those who hear and take it to heart what is written, because the time is near." So today, the time is near to the end of our series, the overview of the Bible, and as much as Greg wants to end this series, because it's been going on forever, I think I'm going to do one more in May, and that will be the end. All right, so May 20th will be the official end of the series. So we've come to the end of the Bible, though, and this is the most controversial book of the Bible, primarily because it deals with all the stuff that, quite frankly, scare the bejeebers out of us. I mean, there's some really scary stuff in the book of Revelation. And literally, hundreds of books have been written about this one book, and every one of them has like a different point of view as to what it all means. Many religious groups have, in fact, sold all their possessions, taken their groups to the top of the mountain, and waited for the return of Jesus because they believe that they have cracked the code of the secret of the book of Revelation. In fact, I've had people through the years who have attended Westridge who have come up to me and read me some of the most complex, most difficult to understand portions of the book of Revelation, and told me that because of this, that they believe that the world's going to come to an end next year, and they wanted me to warn all of you. So consider yourself warned. Unfortunately, in the midst of all of the controversy and the hidden meanings and the craziness of the book of Revelation, there's this incredible message of passion and faith and redemption that gets lost in it all. And it's because people are focusing in on all the little nuances that we may never understand and not focusing in on the big picture, because more than anything else, the book of Revelation is a message of hope. And it gives us an understanding of how one day it's all going to come to an end. So before I get too deep into the actual book, I want to give you a little bit of a context. So when this book of Revelation was written, it was some 60 years after the time of Jesus. Call it 96 AD-ish. And there's a new sheriff in town, a new emperor of Rome called Domitian. And he has become the Roman Empire who, let's just say, he had a bit of a god complex. Because any time that he would end his letters, he would always write, "The Lord God, Domitian." In fact, stamped on the coin of the day is his face with "The Lord God, Domitian." His ego was so big, in fact, that he wanted everyone to worship him, and he made that a law so that it was not optional. So as you can imagine, he hated Christians. Hated them because they refused to worship him and they worshiped another god. And so he had many, many Christians killed during his rule. The Apostle John, who is the writer of the book of Revelation, is the same John who was the disciple of Jesus and wrote the Gospel of John in 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. He's now getting to be a fairly old man. And he had, at the end of his life, become the pastor of the church at Ephesus, where he was living out his final days. However, he refused to bow to Domitian, and he refused to stop preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so he was arrested by the Roman government And he was sent to an island called Patmos, which is this kind of small, rocky, volcanic, basically rock in the middle of the ocean. I would equate it to like Alcatraz that we have off of San Francisco Bay. And this was the place where the Roman government held their political prisoners. And more than likely, John was arrested and held on the island of Patmos because he was a leader in the church, and Domitian wanted to make an example out of him. So, during this time that this book was written, Christians are being put to death by Domitian in great numbers. All the other apostles are dead and gone by now. John is the only one left, and he's being held prisoner. So the whole future of the Christian faith is looking pretty bleak in this day. So as John, who is now probably well into his 80s, is sitting there minding his own business, all of a sudden he hears this incredibly loud voice. John says it sounds like a trumpet coming from the heavens. Little did he know, he was about to receive a vision from God himself. The book of Revelation brings together things that we can't understand. The world of heaven, the world of hell, along with the earth, all in a final confrontation between the forces of good and evil. All of its characters and images are both real and symbolic at the same time, both spiritual and encouraging, and yet sometimes really scary. But through all of the cryptic symbolism and mystery, one thing comes through loud and clear. If you can overcome all of this, whatever it is that you face in this life, no matter how hard it is, if you're able to overcome it with your faith left intact, it will all be so worth it. Because Jesus promises in this book that one day he will come back for us. So, getting through the book of Revelation in one morning is no easy task. I mean, literally, like seminary courses are, dedicated to the book of Revelation, 1,000-page books. But so I really struggled with how to kind of give everybody kind of a pretty easy understanding of at least what is contained in the pages. And so what I decided to do was to really look, the book of Revelation is really organized around 4 visions that the Apostle John receives. And so I think what I'm going to do is just break it down this morning into those 4 visions and just kind of give you a brief overview about what is contained in each of the visions. Just remember that the Apostle John, I think this is very important to remember. So the Apostle John basically is on this island. He gets swept up into this, these visions that he has, and then it's his job to write down everything that he's seen and heard, right? So a lot of what he has seen and heard is beyond even his comprehension, and so he's doing his best to articulate what he has seen. So, there's things that everybody pontificates about, what's the meaning of this or this. I'm not even sure if the Apostle John had a firm understanding of some of the things that he had written down. So I just want you to keep that in the back of your mind as we begin to kind of delve into the content. But Vision 1 is probably the most straightforward. It's chapters 1 through 3. And I would really encourage you, if you don't want to delve into the craziness of Revelation, at least read Revelation chapter 1 through 3, because this is where Jesus appears to John, and he gives him a very straightforward and personal message to the 7 churches. And there's a lot of application in chapters 1 through 3 to what we deal with today as a church and the struggles that we have. So at the time that this was written, there were these 7 churches that were started in an area known as Asia Minor. And I think we have a map. And so you can see this. So you can see Greece is over here to the left. Rome's up here, there. So Palestine is kind of over here to the right. So it's kind of over here in this area. This would be modern-day Turkey. All right, so you have these 7 churches that kind of form this circle: Smyrna and Ephesus and Pergamum and Thyatira and Sardis and Philadelphia and Laodicea. And you can see down here in the lower left corner, that little red, if you're not able to read it, that is the island of Patmos, where John is as he's writing to these 7 churches. And so Jesus is concerned enough for these churches that he felt that each one of them needed kind of a redirection and inspiration about moving forward. So Revelation was really sent as a circular letter, which means that, and it was a tradition that if an apostle wrote a letter, it would be read out loud by the pastor to the congregation. So the letter would have kind of made the rounds to each of the 7 churches and read out loud in each of the 7 church services. And so if you can imagine, and as you read these chapters, you'll get what I'm talking about, but the churches hear the words of Jesus himself in these letters describing the good, the bad, and the ugly of each of the 7 churches. So let me give you, for example, in chapter 3, verse 14, it says, "To the angel of the church in Laodicea, write, these are the words of the Amen, the faithful and true witness, the ruler of God's creation. I know your deeds," Jesus says, "that you're neither cold nor hot. You're not on fire for Jesus, and you're not cold, you're kind of in the middle. I wish that you were one or the other," he says, "so because you are lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, I'm about to spit you out of my mouth." I mean, that's serious words from Jesus. I mean, you could have probably heard a pin drop as Jesus exposes the dark side of each church. Revelation was sent not only to help these churches kind of shine some light on their deficiencies and where they're going wrong, to help them to get a course correction, but also to encourage and inspire them in their quest for faith and living out an authentic relationship with Jesus Christ. And so in these chapters, Jesus is really trying to tell these churches, hey, come on, get it together. You're slipping. Your faith is teetering, and if you're not careful, you're going to fall away from your faith. I have never, ever seen the Christian life as an easy life, and maybe it's because of my kind of skepticism. And I often get criticized for describing the Christian life as a hard life. And while we will never, and hopefully in our lifetime, never encounter what the Christians of that day encountered under the rule of Domitian and the persecution and the killings because of people's faith, when we, even in today's world, take on the Christian faith, we add a layer of complexity to our lives in an already complex and difficult to navigate world. And what I can say is that no matter how hard the Christian life is, there is no better life. To have a life with a sense of purpose and mission that Christianity brings, I can't imagine having a more fulfilling life outside of the context of the Christian faith. And I think that it gets to the heart of what Jesus is trying to communicate here, because at the end of each time that Jesus addresses each and every one of these 7 churches, he says, "To him who overcomes. To him who overcomes, your name will be written in the book of life. To him who overcomes, you will be with me in paradise." And to each one, he gives a personal message of inspiration, if you overcome, what the promise is. And Jesus is basically saying that if you can stay the course and make it to the finish line, overcoming all the obstacles, whatever they may be, that are thrown your way, that this world wants to get in the way of your faith, if you can overcome and make it to the finish line of this life with your faith left intact, one day it will all be so worth it. You'll see. So Vision 1 is pretty straightforward in the first 3 chapters, and I really encourage you, if you don't read any more of the book of Revelation, read those 3 chapters. Vision 2 really is the craziness. Gets to the core of the craziness of Revelation. It's chapters 4 through 16. And this really, I would categorize it as saying God's judgment at the end of the world. So this is the most complicated and difficult part of the book because these are the chapters that contain a very long series of visions with many different twists and turns. So it's in these chapters that we're introduced to the four horsemen of the apocalypse, that we're introduced to the dragon and the beast and the seven trumpets and the seven seals and the seven bowls. And yes, even the infamous mark of the beast, which we are told in Revelation chapter 13, verse 18, is the number 666. Just hearing that, kind of makes your hair on the back of your neck stand up. But while there may be some very, very scary images that we may never understand what all the ins and outs of them truly mean, the bottom line of this section is this. It makes it very clear that in the end, God is in control. Whatever tangent you may want to go on because of one of these things, God is in control. I don't know about you, but when I picture Judgment Day, and that's what this section gets into is God's judgment. And when I picture Judgment Day, I picture like walking, a door opening, and I'm walking into a dark space, and it's actually a dark movie theater. And as I walk in, I can feel the spotlight turn on, and it hits me in the face, and I'm kind of doing one of these things to see like who's behind the spotlight. And as I say, "Hey, who's there?" I can hear the projector kick on and the reels start to spin as the voice says, "Darren Sloniger, this is your life." And, I look up on the screen and all the stuff that you wanted to forget about, the stuff that happened behind the bleachers at the football game in high school and the 21st birthday party, all of that stuff that you want to forget, like all that stuff comes like rushing back, right? And you start squirming in your chair and you're just waiting for this big angry God to come and zap you, right? If I fully describe this, what everybody kind of feels? Yeah. But what I find interesting in this section is that in the midst of the lightning and the thunder and the plagues and the earthquakes, it says that sitting on the throne in the judgment seat is not an angry God. It's a lamb. And it symbolizes tenderness and vulnerability. And in chapter 5, he says, "And then I saw a lamb, looking as if it had been slain, standing at the center of the throne, encircled by the four living creatures and the elders. And he went and he took the scroll from the right hand of him who sat on the throne. And when he had taken it, the four living creatures and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb. Each of them had a harp, and they were holding golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of God's people. And they sang a new song, and they were singing, 'You are worthy to take the scroll and to open its seals, because you were slain. And with your blood, you purchased for God persons from every tribe and language and people and nation.' And then I looked, and I heard the voice of many angels, numbering thousands upon thousands and 10,000 times 10,000. And they encircled the throne and the living creatures and the elders, and in a loud voice they were saying, 'Worthy is the Lamb who was slain to receive power and wealth and wisdom and strength and honor and glory and praise forever.'" You may remember from the Good Friday service that when when they're painting the picture of the crucifixion, Jesus is referred to as the lamb being led to the slaughter, and that's really the imagery that they're picking up on here. And I just find it interesting that in the midst, when you start reading the chaos of this at the end of the world, and like when you boil it down, it's telling us that the same Jesus that we read about in the New Testament, the Jesus of compassion and love and gentleness, is the same Jesus who will be sitting on the throne that day that we show up on Judgment Day. Whatever idea you have in your head of what it looks like, there is this very real biblical concept that one day there will be a day of reckoning. And whatever that looks like, when the world ends, there will be this moment where we are all held accountable for how we have spent our days here on this earth. And on that day, there is no question that Emperor Domitian will not be on that throne. And no other president or ruler of this world, however great they think they are, they will not end up on that throne. That on that day, the only one who will sit on that throne is Jesus Christ. Well, the third vision is incorporated in chapters 17 through 20, and this really gets down to the second coming of Jesus and the demise of Satan, and it's here that we catch a glimpse of hell. And so it's in these chapters that we see that Jesus kind of transforms from this gentle lamb into this great warrior who's riding this white horse with this double-edged sword, and he is hell-bent on conquering evil and saving his people as he takes on the beast and all things that are evil, and he casts them down into the pits of hell. Right? So we don't really know much about hell, but from what the little we do know of it, I can tell you this. I don't really want to go there. And a lot of people try to romanticize hell, in some way, and I think it's, for some of us who can catch try to get a grip on it. I love, for instance, Far Side cartoons, if you remember those Far Side cartoons. And one of my favorite is the two guys that are sitting in hell, and one just kind of leans over the other one and he goes, I hate this place. It's like, and then the same two guys are sitting in hell a little bit later, and one guy goes, it's not the heat, it's the humidity. It's just, so, we try to get some fun images to try to deal with it, but the sobering truth is, Revelation 20 gives us a real sobering image of hell, and it says, in verse 11, it says, then I saw a great throne, and I saw a great white throne and him who was seated on it, and I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne, and books were opened, and yet another book was opened, which was the book of life. And the dead were judged according to what they had done that were as recorded in the books. And then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire, because the lake and fire is the second death. And anyone whose name was not found written in the book of life was thrown into the lake of fire. So the Bible makes it very clear that no matter how gentle and compassionate Jesus is, for those whose names are not written in the book of life, in other words, for those who have made a conscious decision to not follow Jesus in this life, will be thrown into the pits of hell. And make no mistake about it, hell is a very real place, and in the end, we don't want to be anywhere near it. So before we get all depressed about that, the good news of the gospel is about to break through into the new vision, which is the brighter vision of a new tomorrow. And so the final and fourth vision is in the last two chapters of the book of Revelation, which is the new heaven and the new earth. And so the Apostle John says, and then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. And then I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. And he will wipe every tear from their eyes, and there will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. He who was seated on the throne said, I am making everything new. I mean, that really is a beautiful image, I think, of heaven. But heaven is really hard to conceive of, right? I mean, I can't help it every time I think about that is my son Jacob, when he was young, the only image he had of church, of course, was Westridge. And We were meeting at Elgin Community College at the time, so his vision of a church was a community college, basically. And so when his grandmother died, and I said that she had gone to heaven, and we end up going to the funeral, and we pull up in front of this Greek Orthodox church, which is incredibly ornate, trimmed with gold and white, and just this beautiful cathedral building that he's never laid eyes on before. And so I say, okay, I just want you to know that Yahya is in there, and we're going to go in and say goodbye. And so he gets out of the car, and he just kind of looks up, and he goes, "Is this heaven?" So, heaven really is. It's just very hard to conceive of and imagine. And for me, I don't think the struggle is really whether or not heaven exists as much as, am I going to like it? Is it going to be boring? What are we going to do up there all that time, right? Some pastors, describe it as being like this eternal worship service. I'm like, oh, good, we get to sing all 55 verses of When the Roll is Called Up Yonder, right? You guys think that we get comments every now and then, we make you stand too long during the worship time here at Westridge. Can you imagine an eternal worship service? How bad your feet would be hurting? Don't be complaining no more. But, when I read this passage, we begin to get, I think, a different view. And I think the most important thing that God wants to communicate beyond anything else is that heaven is the place where God is. Right? And wherever God is, that's where I want to be. And no matter where he is, that is more beautiful than anything else than I can ever conceive of or imagine. Listen to some of the last words from the book of Revelation, chapter 22. It says, "And then the angel showed me the river of the water of life, as clear as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb down the middle of the great street of the city. And on each side of the river stood the tree of life. And the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations. No longer will there be any curse. The throne of God and the Lamb will be in the city, and his servants will serve him. And there will be no more light. They'll not need the light of a lamp or the light of the sun, for the Lord God will give them light, and they will reign forever and ever." So the cool thing about this passage is, if you kind of listen real closely, you can hear images of Eden, can't you? The tree of life, the fact that there's no longer any curse. And so when I imagine heaven, I imagine, like we talked about back in the creation story and the fall of man story, that I imagine that life is going to end as it began. This is just me. That maybe, just maybe, the way we end up is the way that God intended it to be when he was so excited about breathing life into that first man and the possibilities of being together, never separated from God. And he recreates the Garden of Eden in the end. And it sounds like it may be more of a urban context than an agricultural one this time, but as long as there's a good coffee shop and a wine bar around the corner, I'm good. So, with that final image of heaven, the final words of the Bible come to a close. And as it does, and as you read those final things, he just keeps saying over and over, "I'm coming soon. I'm coming soon." That is the message of the book of Revelation, where it said in that very first verse, "I'm telling you this because the time is near. Life is short. Don't waste it. I am coming back for you." Nobody knows. Jesus makes it very clear that nobody knows. Nobody knows the time or the date that I'm coming back. You can't crack that code. But I am coming back. And so I just encourage you that as you read the book of Revelation, don't get caught in the weeds of all the stuff that we don't understand, to get caught up in all the tangents and all the symbolism and all of that. Keep your eye on the big picture of what Revelation is really trying to communicate, and the focus is found in the person of Jesus. Jesus is the central character of the book of Revelation. He is the Lamb who was slain. He is the one riding on the white horse with a double-edged sword, wiping out evil and saving us. He is the one who brings light and eternity into the next life. He is the one that at the end of the day is sitting on the throne. He is the one who we will come face to face with when we walk out of this world and into the next. Allow the book of Revelation to be for you what it was for the 7 churches that it was written to, which is to shine light on the deficiencies of our life, the dark stuff that we need to get out, to create a course correction for realizing we need to make some changes, and then to be inspired and to understand that at the end of the day, the end of the story is He wins. He wins. When we finally get that this life is just a blip on the screen compared to the rest of eternity, you can't help but want to spend every day living in some meaningful way, to live more passionately, to live differently. The book of Revelation is saying, don't waste another moment of your life on the wrong stuff. And the best way to sum that up is to ask yourself, if you knew that tonight was your last night, if you knew that tonight you were going to meet your Maker, that you were going to stand in front of the Lamb who looked as if it was slain, sitting on the throne, if you were going to look into the eyes of Jesus tonight, as you're standing there, what is it that you'd want to make sure is cut out of your life? What would you want to make sure that your life is now filled with? If you had just one chance, one more chance, how would you want to live differently? Because this, right now, this is our one shot.